Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sake Revolution. This is America's first sake podcast, and I'm your host, John Puma from the Sake Notes, also the administrator over at the friendly neighborhood internet Sake Discord, the guy on the show who is most definitely not a sake samurai. I'm just your local sake nerd.
And I am your host, Timothy Sullivan. I am a sake samurai. I'm also a sake educator, and I am the founder of the Urban Sake website. And every week, John and I will be tasting and chatting about all things sake and doing our best to make it fun and easy to understand.
Tim, this week, we're doing another one of our prefecture deep dives, and I am very excited because it is one of my favorite places for sake. And if I'm not mistaken, we actually done our homework on this one. You and I have both been there.
We've both been there, and all I can say is we are going deep.
It's going to be a good time.
We're going deep.
Sorry, what was that?
We're going deep. This is a deep dive.
Yeah, this is the deep south, I want to say. It's like the southmost place in Japan, if I'm not mistaken, right?
So, John, where are we headed today?
We're going to Kochi.
We are going to Kochi. Yes.
Yeah,
so do you know which of the four islands Kochi's on?
I do, but I can't remember right now.
Well, it's the smallest of the four main islands of Japan, and it's called Shikoku.
That exactly.
Pardon my pronunciation, everyone out there. Shikoku Island. And it is on the Pacific-facing side of that island. And it's kind of shaped like a crescent, isn't it? It's like a kind of like an upside-down U shape.
Yeah.
And it is known for a lot of things, which we're going to talk about.
Yeah, it's an upside-down U shape. And Kochi is actually the southernmost bit of that U.
Yes.
Which makes it kind of isolated and a mild pain to get to. Unless you're okay with flying domestically in Japan, which I am. But if I hear that if you want to take like a rail or a bus or something like that, you're in for quite a trip because there's a lot of mountains in between the one side of that island and Kochi. Kochi is very geographically isolated.
It sure is. One word you have to know when you talk about Kochi is Tosa, T-O-S-A. Many parts of Japan had a previous name to them. So this was like the feudal domain. Mm-hmm. And what is currently Kochi used to be known as Tosa. So very often, even in names of sakes and things like that, you hear this name Tosa. And the most prominent use of Tosa in the world of sake is the Toji Guild, or the Master Brewers Guild from this region is called the Tosa Guild. Mm-hmm. So that's important to keep in mind too. You're going to see that name again and again when you explore this region.
That's right. They're not shy about that. And the Tosa Guild and like the sake producers of Kochi tend to be really tight, and they do a lot of co-promotion. You know, their attitude is very much that we're in this together. They're very big on their prefectural identity when it comes to sake. They share a lot of tech. They share rice. They work together on making new rices, on making new yeast. They are super tight and super coordinated. And I think that the prefecture, the cities and the people really appreciate that. And they are behind their producers 100%.
That is absolutely right. They exchange a lot of information, and the government supports it too. So they are all on they're all on Team Kochi. You know what I mean?
Yes. That's it. Absolutely. And the interesting thing, there's not that many sake breweries in Kochi, but Kochi's a big name in sake. There's only 18, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Looked it up. We've got 18 breweries there.
They're well known. They make very high quality sake. That's renowned for the entire country. And again, the people in Kochi like to drink.
I've heard that Kochi has the largest per capita alcohol consumption of any region of Japan.
So I had also heard this, and then I looked into it a bit, and I found out that's a misnomer.
Rumor.
It's a rumor. There are other prefectures that drink more.
Okay.
But they drink the most of their own sake.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes. They drink most of they drink the most local sake. So the Ji-sake in Kochi is very popular in Kochi.
I see. All right. Now it's all coming together.
Yeah. But I remember for years hearing about, oh, they drink more than anybody per capita. And I was like, that's very interesting. And I, at some point, somebody like blew that up on me, and I was really sad because I went all this time thinking it was like thinking that was the case. And then when that was corrected and it was like, well, really it's about local Nihonshu. I was like, okay. And then I went to Kochi and it all made perfect sense. Because it's like, I feel like when in a lot of other parts of Japan, you can walk around places and you won't see too much about sake. You won't see too many ads, really. A lot of places are going to be mostly beer and cocktails or whiskey, highballs, and blah, blah, blah. But in Kochi, sake is front and center, and it's got a very prominent place in a lot of their restaurant and food culture, which is nice. It's refreshing.
Yeah. So as you mentioned before, you and I have both visited Kochi. So I want to ask you, John, what's your most prominent, most memorable experience that you had when you visited there?
Well, my most prominent memory, it might have been going to this izakaya that only served sake from Kochi. And he was a super intense sake nerd, and he had over 300 bottles. And when he said that, I was like, well, that there's only 18 breweries. That doesn't add up in my head. That you can't have that many bottles of sake from Kochi. And he's like, no. They are all Kochi sakes. And he kind of like started like rummaging through the refrigerator to prove it to me. And sure enough, he has, like, for example, Suige is a very well-known brewery in Kochi. But he had like their nama of every type of, for every grade that they made for like the last 5 years. Like,
oh my God.
So that's how he's getting these numbers, is because he's got all these like older stuff that he's aging on his own, or like limited edition batch stuff that like no one's ever seen before. And so going through and trying all these crazy sakes that I've never heard of, or like their variations on sakes I've had, was exciting and a lot of fun, actually.
Oh my gosh. I thought we were doing a Kochi deep dive, but that guy is doing a Kochi deep dive.
That was but I want to say, apart from that, when you went, did you go to the Hirome market?
Yes, I did.
That's an experience.
Must do, yeah. So, John, why don't you describe what the Hirome Ichiban market is all about?
So the Hirome Ichiban market is kind of, it's kind of hard to explain. It's kind of like this is going to sound awful when I say it, but it's like, it reminds me of like a flea market.
It's like an open air market kind.
But it's 80% food and drinks.
Yes.
And so it's all like a lot of like local Kochi foods, mostly like izakaya fare, and tons and tons and tons of alcohol. But it's also it has like a meat shop and a liquor store and clothing stores and all this other stuff in there as well.
Yeah, and there's lots of shared seating, so it's almost like stalls and then shared seating. So it's kind of like fish market and beer garden and everything mixed together.
Beer garden,
right?
That's a good way to put it. Also, yeah.
But it was cramped too. I remember it being kind of cramped, and everyone kind of smushes in together to drink together, and lots of people are talking to each other, and you can very easily get roped, especially as a foreigner, you can get roped into conversations very easily across the table. And I remember having a lot of fun at the market there in Kochi.
Yeah, it's I have to say, as a New Yorker, we intrinsically, a lot of us kind of value our privacy when
personal
we're
space
out and about. And we don't want to be bothered by people sitting next to us. It's rude to talk to strangers in a restaurant.
Yes.
But in Kochi, that is like the height of politeness, is to talk to the people around you. And it took a little while at first when somebody started talking to us. I was like, like what's going on? And then I had to kind of like, no, I'm just being weird. This is just people being friendly and accommodating and wanting to know about us and wanting to know why we're here and what we're about and if we're enjoying our sake. And I thought that was really nice.
Yeah. Well, I actually went to Kochi for a wedding, a Japanese wedding.
Wow. All right. So that's a unique experience, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I experienced a lot of culture around a traditional Japanese wedding, but they also played local Kochi drinking games at the wedding. So there were sake drinking games that were unique to Kochi.
At the wedding.
And at the wedding reception. And the one that I remember the most that was really fun is called Kiku no Hana. Have you heard of this one?
Hana.
Kiku no Hana.
Now, I'm not familiar with Kiku no Hana. I am familiar with some Kochi drinking games, but Kiku no Hana is not, it's a new one for me. So please tell me, what are the rules of Kiku no Hana and how does it result in you drinking a lot of sake? Because I'm sure it does.
It sure does. So at the wedding, there was actually a local Kochi geisha who was hired to come and entertain at the reception. And she walked around with a tray, and the tray had about 12 sake cups that were turned upside down, small ceramic sake cups. Mm-hmm. And under one of the cups was a small kiku, or tiny chrysanthemum blossom, under one of the cups. So she'd walk around and then gather a group together and hold the tray out. And then everybody, one by one, had to pick one of the cups. And you turned the cup over, and if there was no flour under there, the next person picked. Uh-huh. And then the next person picked. And then when the person who picked the cup with the flour underneath it, that person had to drink sake out of all the overturned cups.
I was wondering when we were going to get to the part where the drinking happened, and there it is.
So if you're like the seventh person to overturn a cup and you have the flour underneath there, you have to drink your cup and everyone else's cup before you.
That sounds like it gets out of hand in a hurry.
Yes. And then when you're drinking, the geisha would clap her hands and sing this song. She'd ask you what your name was, and then she'd sing a song that's like, John is drinking, and she'd clap her hands and kind of egg you on to drink all the ones. And of course, you know, if there's 12 cups there, you can be in trouble real quick. So
yeah, a little bit. That sounds pretty good.
It was a fun drinking game.
I think I had mentioned earlier that I am familiar with some Kochi drinking games, and my favorite is bekuhai.
Yes,
and I know you've played bekuhai before, because I think you were there when I was introduced to it. It was at.
Is it all right if I don't remember that?
Several years back, and you guys were playing, and I was like, "What is this game?" And you guys told me the rules, and I was like, "This sounds absolutely dangerous."
Yeah. Do you want to tell us about your bekuhai drinking game
I own
experience?
A bekuhai set now, sir.
All right. Well, let's hear it. Explain it for our listeners at home.
All right, I'm going to give this a shot. So in bekuhai, there are 3 vessels, we're going to say, for putting sake in, and they are all shaped like masks. And everybody sits around a table, and there is what is basically amounts to a dreidel that you spin, and the size of the vessel that is facing up needs to be drank by the person that is pointing to. It's very simple, and it's very effective, because one of the masks that you're drinking out of is a tengu, and a tengu is a Japanese, like a not like a demon so much, but like a kind of a mischievous goblin creature with a big nose. And the mask has a long nose, so it fits a rather impressive amount of sake, probably about 100 milliliters, maybe a little bit more. And you're expected to do it, to just drink it. The second cup is called the hyotoko, and it's this Japanese traditional like comic character. You might see a mask that looks like it at festivals, and it's like a guy with a puckered face, a puckered mouth, and there's a hole, so you have to kind of plug it up with your finger and sip it all before you lose any sake. And then the third one is this like tiny little cup called a okame, which is the most merciful of the possible cups that you can have to drink out of.
Yeah, so it's like a top that you spin. It looks like a dreidel, like you said, and it's a little bit like spin the bottle, in that whoever it points to, they have to do something, and then whatever shows up on the top side of the top, there's pictures of all the different cups, right? And then you have to drink it, and the cups, you described the shapes of the cups, but the one of the really important things is that when they're filled with sake, you can't set them down because they're all these odd shapes.
Yeah.
So you have to drink it and you can't set the cup down or sake is going to go everywhere. It forces you to drink the whole cup.
Yeah.
So yeah, this definitely ties back to the consumption per capita in Kochi.
Yes. The people in Kochi are a wonderful, wonderful, happy bunch. Kochi City, though, I was surprised Kochi's a little bit smaller than I expected. It's a little more rural. Everything is a little smaller. And it is, as I mentioned earlier, isolated. The ocean is on one side and mountains are behind it. And it takes a while to get anyplace else, which is also probably why they've kind of developed their own drinking culture, their own eating culture, their own way of doing things. And it's probably why they favor a lot of their own stuff. They probably feel in a lot of ways that they're kind of on their own.
Yeah. I learned one word when I was there.
Ooh.
Okyaku, which is a word that many people know. You may have heard okyaku-san.
It sounds familiar.
That means customer. It means customer in Japanese. But this word okyaku in Kochi means party or feast or get together.
Uh-huh.
So they have this okyaku culture that every day is kind of a party, and they they really have this special brand of hospitality down there.
Yeah.
And I think that isolation plays into it. The drinking games plays into it. And one other thing I want to mention before we move on to the tasting is the local star cuisine of Kochi. There's one dish that reigns supreme. It's the Yamada Nishiki of Kochi food, the king.
the king of local cuisine.
The king of local cuisine. And when I visited for the wedding that I went to, every izakaya, every restaurant I went to had this dish front and center. You could not escape it.
No.
Did you have it too? Do you know what I'm talking about?
In a lot of restaurants, when you walk past them, there's somebody in the window making this dish.
Yes. Yes.
Because it is also, in addition to being very famous, it is somewhat photogenic. Like it is watching somebody prepare this dish is something that is it's a sight to be seen.
Yes. And we are talking about bonito.
Yeah.
Bonito. In English, it's striped jack tuna. And it's a type of fish, obviously. And the flesh is like ruby red. It's like really beautiful fish when you cut it open. And this is so identified with Kochi. I know that there is more striped jack tuna consumed in Kochi than anywhere else in Japan. I read that on the internet, so it has to be true. And they make something, well, first of all, the most famous preparation of bonito is called Katsuo no tataki. And that is a preparation where they slice it raw, like sashimi, and then they expose it to flames from rice straw. So they burn rice straw, flames come up very dramatically, and they sear it. They sear the outside. So it's seared on the outside, raw in the middle. So delicious. They serve it with some soy sauce and ginger and maybe some scallions. Oh my God, so good.
What else do you see a lot of in Kochi? You see a lot of whale images and statues and murals and mosaics, and you also see a lot of the guy who for a lot of years I refer to as that Kochi dude. And you're familiar with who I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely.
Ryoma Sakamoto. Statues of this samurai everywhere. And he's always got he usually has his arm in his robe. Yeah. And I think the sakes that we're going to talk about today touch on both aspects of this Kochi iconography.
Yes. Well, why don't we introduce both of the sakes we brought?
Yeah.
And then when we dig a little deeper, we can talk about Sakamoto-san and we can talk about whales too. So why don't you tell us what you brought from Kochi, John?
Today, I brought a sake from Suige Brewery, which is ubiquitous, a very, very famous brand from Kochi. And this is their Koiku 54 Junmai Ginjo. Now, the Tokubatsu Junmai is like their most famous product, I think. We've definitely tasted that on the show before, but since we were kind of going a little deeper into Kochi, I wanted to try something different and not have the same sake again. Also, this is a really interesting sake with a really interesting story that I can't wait to tell later. What did you bring, Tim?
Awesome. Well, Suige is one of the most famous breweries in Kochi. I also went famous. I picked Tsukasa Botan, and I have their very much beloved Tokubetsu Junmai, which is called Senshu Hasaku. Senshu Hasaku. And it is a dry, lovely Junmai. We've got a milling rate of 60%, SMV plus 8, so nice and dry. Yamada Nishiki rice, and it has an acidity of 1.4, 15% alcohol. It's a lovely, lovely sake.
Yeah, and the suige uses a local rice that was developed by Kochi Prefecture called Gin no Yume. The name of the project to make this rice was Koiku 54. So it's kind of like their name, since it was the first sake they were making using this rice, they named it after a project to make the rice. It took them I want to say 20 years to get to the point where they started to use it for production in this sake. This sake has only been around for about 4 years. So it's a relatively, 5 years now, relatively new stuff.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah. Tim, why don't you crack open your Tsukasa Botan and tell us a little bit about the brewery and get into the details here, into the weeds.
Okay. Before we go any further, look at this label, John.
It's beautiful.
It is neon orange writing on it.
It is neon orange, but the thing that stands out to me mostly is that it's not a standard rectangle. It is a square at 90 degrees.
It's a diamond. Yeah, it's a diamond shape.
Yeah, and it's very distinctive. It's very unusual, and it's something that when you see it on the shelf, you can't not. It does not. There's no way it doesn't catch your eye.
Yeah. Okay, let me get this open. Okay, so again, the brand is Tsukasa Botan, and this is their Tokubetsu Junmai. Tsukasa Botan means king of the peony. So that's what really the brewery name means. And this is a brewery that's been around for a long time, founded in 1603.
Wow. 1603?
Yeah. Yes. Now, you mentioned Ryoma Sakamoto a moment ago. That was a samurai who was born in Kochi and lived from around 1836, 1835 until 1867. And he's Kochi's most famous historical figure by far.
Yeah.
He died right before what's known as the Meiji Restoration, which is when the power went from the shogun back to the emperor. And he was a proponent of that, and he wrote a treatise called Senshu Hasaku, or the 8-point plan. And he wrote these ideas for reforming the government, which was under the shogun, or a military dictator. And the ideas that he came up with in this treatise, a lot of them were used for the Meiji government, which followed in 1868. But he got assassinated because some people in the shogunate government didn't like these ideas.
Who knew?
So he is kind of a
when you go against the military dictator, sometimes the military dictator doesn't like that. And wow, military dictator has assassins.
Yes. Shocking, I know. But he became a symbol of kind of the modernization of Japan, pulling Japan out of the isolation period, these new Reformation ideas. And his statue is everywhere in Kochi.
Yeah, it's literally everywhere.
This sake, Senshu Hasaku, is named after that treatise that he wrote, the 8-point plan for reforming the government. And that is the exciting historical background on the name of this sake. I think it's interesting anyway.
It's interesting. I see imagery representing Sakamoto-san on a lot of Tsukasa Botan's products. Like, I think that they feel like he represents Kochi, they represent Kochi, and they're kind of co-promoting in a way.
Well, don't forget, The brewery was founded in 1603. So the brewery was already 230 years old when this guy was born.
That's amazing.
So I bet you he drank and enjoyed sake from Tsukasa Botan for sure. So they're very invested in their local history, and he's like the main guy. So there's a strong connection between the history of the brewery and the history of the prefecture. And I think this figure ties it all together. So that's why they named this after his most famous writing.
That's wonderful.
And yeah, so let's give it a smell. Okay, this smells dry and clean. The ricey flavor is not fruity, but very gentle, grainy aroma. It smells clean. It smells light.
That sounds very Kochi.
Yes.
Kochi, somewhat known for drier sake.
I think among the 18 sake breweries in Kochi, of course, there's modern styles, but the traditional regional style, as you just said, is very famous for being more dry and more robust. Like Niigata's dry, but it's light, clean, and water-like. But Kochi's a little bit more forward and a little bit more rustic, but dry. Yeah. And this has that type of aroma. Riciness, a little bit of lactic or kind of a milk cream aroma, and grain or ricey notes come through. Let's give it a taste. Oh my gosh. It is dry, clean, and it has a bit of a bite to it in the best possible way. It is smooth, but it has that dryness that kind of clips the back of your palate. And it's not soft and water-like like that Niigata sake I was just talking about. This is more robust, more full-bodied, but it's so elegant too. And it has a really pronounced dry finish. So if you are a dry sake lover, more on the robust side, Kochi is the place for you. Don't you agree?
I mean, yeah.
I think so.
I mean, that's a fact. Oh, and this, you said this was plus 8?
So plus 8.
Ooh, that is pretty dry.
I think of all, I'm thinking back to all the sakes we've had over the last dozens of episodes, and I think this may be one of the driest we've ever had.
I want to say, as far as sake meter value, it's almost certainly the driest. Yeah. That's very interesting.
And this is such a great sake. It's really elegant, but it has body and it has dryness, and it's just really great.
And what's the mouthfeel like?
You know, when you sip on something like a martini, or you sip on a sip of vodka, it kind of dries the sides of your tongue a little bit.
Sure.
You get a little bit of that drying quality on the palate when you sip a sake this dry, this void of sugar. So it is really bracing. That's a good word for it. It's a bracing sake. Dry, bright, and robust, full.
That sounds very
really
tasty.
Nice. It is so good. And we've had a wide variety of styles over the last few episodes. Some fruity, some lighter, and this is a really nice change of pace.
Wonderful. That's great.
Yeah.
It sounds wonderful.
So,
sounds pretty fantastic. I've had this sake, but
yummy.
not in a very long time.
Oh my gosh. Super yummy. All right. So, John, we are going to go from Ryoma Sakamoto
to Wales.
Over to you. To Wales. What's the deal with the whales?
So the whales, suige, means drunken whale. I do not condone feeding alcoholic beverages to sea mammals. I think that is, maybe that's how beaching happens. I don't know.
No whales were harmed in the making of this episode.
Exactly. However, like we mentioned earlier, whale iconography, very popular in Kochi. You can't go down the street without seeing photos of whales or paintings, etc. So Suige making their brand Drunken Whale makes a lot of sense. The brewery, though, comparably a baby next to Tsukasa Botan, 1872. So they actually didn't come into existence until a couple of years after Sakamoto-san passed away.
Yes. So we know for sure that Ryoma Sakamoto never drank suige.
That seems to be extraordinarily unlikely that he would have.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to open this one up. And give it a pour.
We talked about the label on my sake,
Oh, yes.
but I think your label deserves a mention too.
So it is a simple white label with a silhouette of a vertical whale tail. And
yes,
it's very cool. It's very striking. It's something that when you see it on a shelf, you can't miss it. It's definitely the one with the whale tail on it. And as I mentioned earlier, this is using that Gin no Yume rice. It is milled down to 50% remaining. I believe I had also mentioned earlier that the sake meter value, since that seems to be an interesting topic when we're talking about this Kochi sake, is 6.7. So it's still higher than like I think any other sake we've done on the show, but it is not as high as yours with that plus 8. So on the nose here, it is not as it doesn't have that ricey aroma that a lot of their sake has. It doesn't come off as crisp on the nose either. It's kind of a light, kind of somewhat fruity aroma, very, very faintly fruity, citrusy, very pleasant. And then the flavor is also kind of atypical of their classic style. So it's moving into this kind of newer, more modern style for Kochi, but I think it still kind of represents. It is very dry, very clean finish. The citrus notes play around in the middle. They're not getting a lot of like melon or other tropical fruit on this. Some nice umami as well. The mouthfeel is a little light. It kind of just it's here and it's gone. It doesn't stick around very much. And again, the finish is nice and light, and then it's gone. And you want to have another sip. It is very easy sipping. This falls into that, where did that bottle go? Kind of category where you can accidentally really get carried away with it because it's very sippable, very light. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, it's going to go really well with, like so much of Kochi sake, it's going to go very well with food that is a little heavier, a little greasier. I would love to have this with fish and chips. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The sake that you're drinking, I've had that many times as well. And it is a higher SMV. That's 6.7. So it's on the high side, but it doesn't drink like a super bone dry sake. It's got more balance. It's more well integrated. My sake is more one-sided in that they wanted to show you something super dry.
Yeah, yours is aggressively dry. Mine it's dry. It's, in fact, I would still say it's like very dry. The dryness is definitely present, but as you pointed out, it's not the star of the show.
Right.
And it's not dominant, which is wonderful. It's very well balanced off of the other factors in it. It's just a lovely, lovely sake.
Yeah. And it stays true to their roots as a Kochi brewery.
Mm-hmm.
It has that dry backbone to it, but I find that your sake weaves in a lot of threads of different nuances. So you've got that little citrus note going on, a little bit of fruitiness, and it has a lot going on and brings a lot of good balance to it. Very drinkable, very crushable, as you said.
Definitely.
Well, I want to thank you, John. Thanks for all the good memories from Kochi, and I want to thank all our listeners for tuning in. We really do hope that you're enjoying Sake Revolution. If you'd like to show your support for our show, one way to really help us out would be to take a couple of minutes and leave us a written review on Apple Podcasts. It's a great way to help us spread the word about our show.
And if for some reason you can't get Apple Podcasts, please go and tell a friend and get your friend to subscribe. And while you're at it, don't be a hypocrite. You should subscribe. This way, every week when we publish a new episode of the show, it will magically show up on your device of choice, and you will not miss an episode.
And as always, if you would like to learn more about any of the topics, such as Kochi, or Ryoma Sakamoto or whales. Or if you would like to learn more about any of the sakes we tasted in today's episode, and you have to look at those labels, please be sure to visit our show notes at our website, sakerevolution.com.
Is that our big takeaway from today, Tim? That Kochi's label game is really strong?
It's one of the many takeaways from today.
All right. And if you have sake questions that you need answered, we want to hear from you. Reach out to us. The email address is feedback@sakerevolution.com. So until next time, please remember to keep drinking sake and kanpai.